When I married my second wife last spring, I hadn't told her that the inn where I worked as a handyman and groundskeeper was actually mine. I told her I was just the hired help, a 63-year-old widower grateful for steady work and a free room above the carriage house. I did the right thing keeping quiet, because 3 weeks after our wedding, she handed me a termination notice and told me to have my tools out of the shed by Friday. I never thought I'd fall for anyone again after Evelyn passed. Cancer took her in the fall of 2019, and I spent the better part of 2 years doing what I'd always done when life got hard. I worked. I got up before dawn. I fixed what was broken. I kept things running. The Harborview Inn had been Evelyn's dream more than mine, originally. We bought the property together back in 1998, a rundown Victorian on 3 acres outside Gloucester, Massachusetts. We renovated it ourselves over 4 years, every weekend, every spare dollar. By the time we opened, it had 8 guest rooms, a garden terrace, and a reputation for the kind of quiet, unhurried hospitality that people drove 2 hours from Boston to find. When Evelyn died, I kept it going because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I restructured it under a holding company, Ashby Property Group, Evelyn's maiden name, and hired a manager to handle bookings and front of house. I stayed on as the property caretaker. Same as always. Same boots, same work gloves, same beat-up Carhartt jacket. The guests never knew the man raking the gravel path or replacing the porch boards was the one who signed their paychecks. I met my future wife at the Gloucester Farmers Market on a Saturday morning in late August 2 years ago. She was standing at the preserves table, trying to decide between strawberry and blueberry jam, and she couldn't make up her mind. And I said the strawberry because it's local, and the blueberry comes from Maine, and she laughed like I'd said something genuinely funny instead of just practical. Her name was Patricia. She'd moved to Gloucester 6 months earlier from outside Cincinnati after a divorce that she described as the most expensive mistake of 2 people's lives. She was 58, taught yoga 3 mornings a week at a studio downtown, and rented a small apartment on Prospect Street. She was warm and curious, and had the kind of laugh that made a room feel easier. We started meeting for coffee, then dinner. Then she began stopping by the inn on Sunday afternoons just to walk the grounds because she said the garden made her feel calm. I told her I'd worked at the inn for years, that the owner was an investment group out of Boston that I rarely heard from. It wasn't exactly a lie. Ashby Property Group was incorporated in Massachusetts with a registered agent in Boston, and a management structure designed so that my name didn't appear on anything a casual search would turn up. Patricia didn't push. She said she liked that I was a man who was content with honest work, that her ex-husband had been consumed by building wealth and protecting it, and it had turned him into someone she didn't recognize anymore. She said she wasn't looking for money or status. She said she just wanted someone steady. I believed her. I shouldn't have, but I did. We dated for 14 months. I was careful in ways I'd learned to be after Evelyn died. I kept my finances completely separate. I drove my old Ford F-150 to see her, not the Audi I kept in storage. I never mentioned the investment portfolio, the commercial property in Rockport I'd purchased in 2015, or the fact that the inn alone appraised at just under $2 million. I was just Patrick Sauer, handyman, 63, widower, man who knew how to fix a leaking copper pipe, in which heirloom tomatoes grew best in coastal New England soil. I proposed on the garden terrace on a Thursday evening in October, the hydrangeas still holding their color in the last of the fall light. Patricia said yes before I'd finished the sentence. Her daughter, who lived in Portland, Maine, called that night to say she was happy for us. Her son-in-law texted a single line, "Welcome to the family." It felt real. It felt earned. We married quietly in April, just the 2 of us, and a justice of the peace, with Patricia's daughter and son-in-law as witnesses. We had dinner at a restaurant in Rockport afterward, the 4 of us around a corner table with a view of the harbor. It was a good night. I thought it was a beginning. The termination notice appeared on my workbench in the carriage house on a Tuesday morning, 19 days after the wedding. I'd come in early to check on a section of fence the previous night's wind had damaged. The notice was in an envelope with my name written in Patricia's handwriting. Inside was a single typed page informing me that Ashby Property Group had completed a change of management, and that my services as property caretaker were no longer required, effective immediately with 2 weeks' severance. Below the typed portion was a second document, a management transfer agreement already signed on one signature line, with a space waiting for mine. I read it twice. Then I set it down and went and found Patricia in the main house. She was in the kitchen with her son-in-law. I'd always found him hard to read, quiet in a way that felt less like thoughtfulness and more like calculation, always watching, always just slightly more interested in the business conversations I occasionally had with the inn's property manager than I would have expected a part-time contractor to be. He was standing near the window with a coffee mug, and Patricia was seated at the table with a woman I didn't know, 50s, professional looking, a leather folio open in front of her. Patricia looked up when I walked in, and the warmth I was used to seeing in her face was replaced by something practiced and careful. Not cold exactly, measured, like she'd been rehearsing. "Patrick," she said, "come sit down. We need to go through some things." I looked at the woman with the folio. "Who is this?" "This is Lorraine. She's a business consultant who's been helping me with the transition." "What transition?" Patricia folded her hands on the table. "The management transfer I sent you this morning. I've been working with Lorraine for the past several weeks on a plan to take over operations here. She's identified several areas where the property is significantly underperforming. The event space isn't being used, the pricing model is outdated, there's no digital marketing presence to speak of. With the right management structure, this property could be generating 30% more revenue within 18 months. I kept my voice even. You can't transfer management of this property. The lease agreement is already in process, Lorraine said. She had the clipped confidence of someone who delivered this kind of news before and found it efficient rather than difficult. Patricia has secured a long-term operating agreement with the holding company. The holding company, I repeated. Ashby Property Group. The registered agent was quite cooperative. I looked at Patricia. You contacted the registered agent. I had Lorraine reach out on my behalf, yes. You've worked here long enough, Patrick. You deserve to retire. And I need to think about building something for myself and my family. This property is exactly the right foundation. Her son-in-law still hadn't said anything. He was looking out the window at the garden. I said, and the severance and the termination notice, 2 weeks. That's what you think is appropriate. It's more than standard for a caretaker position. You should be grateful, honestly. Lorraine found a firm that does property management for inns across the Cape and North Shore. You could find something similar. I picked up the management transfer agreement from the table and looked at it. The registered agent's signature was there. The operating agreement had been drawn up by an attorney. The whole thing looked legitimate to someone who didn't know what they were looking at. Patricia, I said, I need you to listen carefully. You cannot transfer management of this property because the registered agent you spoke with doesn't have transfer authority. Ashby Property Group has a 2-signature requirement for any operating agreement involving this specific property. The second signature is mine. Not because I am the caretaker, because I am the sole owner of Ashby Property Group. The room got very quiet. That's not possible, Lorraine said, though her voice had lost some of its efficiency. I've owned this inn since 1998. My late wife and I built it. The holding structure was set up for estate planning purposes after she died. My name doesn't appear on surface-level searches, but it's on every document that matters. Whatever your registered agent signed, it's not a valid transfer. It's not worth the paper it was printed on. Patricia had gone pale. You're the owner. I'm the owner. You told me you worked here. You told me the company was based in Boston. The company is based in Massachusetts. I work here because I've worked here for 25 years, and I'm not going to stop because I own the place. Those are both true. She pushed back from the table. You lied to me. I kept my finances private. There's a difference. I looked at her son-in-law, who had finally turned away from the window. How long have you known about this plan? He had the decency to look uncomfortable. A couple months. Did you bring Lorraine in? Or did Patricia find her? He hesitated. She came through a referral. Whose referral? He looked at the floor. I turned back to Patricia. Who referred Lorraine to you? Patricia didn't answer immediately, and in that pause I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like a person recalculating. A contact, she said carefully. Someone I met at a business workshop in Salem last winter. I drove home to my house. The house Patricia thought I rented from a friend. The house Evelyn and I had paid off in full before she got sick. And I did what I should have done 14 months earlier. I sat at my desk and I researched Patricia Sauer, née Collier. The divorce from her ex-husband in Ohio was real. The details she'd given me were not. Court records showed she'd received a settlement of $640,000, kept the marital home which she later sold for $310,000, and received spousal support of $4,000 a month for 3 years. Patricia Collier had walked away from her marriage with close to $1 million. She had not been struggling. She had been, by any reasonable measure, financially comfortable. I kept digging. There was a gap of almost 18 months between her divorce and her appearance in Gloucester. Her LinkedIn showed a brief stint as a wellness consultant before she moved north. Before the divorce, she'd been listed as co-director of something called Collier Hospitality Ventures, a company her ex-husband had been involved in that had dissolved under murky circumstances involving a dispute with 2 restaurant partners who'd claimed misrepresentation in an investment agreement. No charges, no conviction, but the pattern had a familiar shape. I found Lorraine next. Her real name was Lorraine Peck, and she had a business consulting website that looked professional until you noticed the stock photography and the testimonials with no verifiable names. A search of public court records in Massachusetts and New Hampshire turned up 2 civil suits in the past 4 years, both involving clients who claimed she'd facilitated fraudulent property acquisition schemes. Both suits had been settled out of court. I called my attorney first thing Wednesday morning. His name was Stuart Okafor, and he'd handled my estate planning after Evelyn died. He was the one who'd set up the 2-signature requirement and the other protections around the property. When I explained what had happened, he was quiet for a long moment. "The management transfer agreement is void," he said. "The registered agent exceeded his authority, and whoever notarized that signature has exposure." "But Patrick, did your wife use her own money to pay this consultant?" "I don't know yet. Find out before we move. If she's been defrauded, that changes the calculus." I wasn't the one who found out. Patricia's daughter called me that same afternoon. I'd met her only a handful of times, at the wedding, at a dinner in Portland, once when she'd driven down to Gloucester for a weekend visit. She seemed like a steady person, cautious and practical in the way of someone who'd grown up watching her mother make impulsive decisions, and learned early to be the opposite. She apologized before she'd said 3 sentences. "I didn't know what they were planning," she said. "Mom told me she was working on a business investment, something with property management. I didn't know it was your in. I didn't know any of it until she called me 2 days ago to tell me the transfer had gone through and she was going to be running it herself." Her voice was tight. "Patrick, she paid Lorraine $45,000. For what?" "For the paperwork. The operating agreement, the consultant fees, something called a proprietary acquisition strategy." Lorraine told her the holding company's registered agent had been negotiating for months, and the deal was ready to close. Mom gave her $45,000 in 2 wire transfers. I thought about that. Has your mother seen any documentation for where that money went? She has invoices. I looked at them this morning. The business address on the invoices is a UPS store in Peabody. There it was. "Your mother's been defrauded?" I said. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "I was afraid you were going to say that. Has she borrowed against anything to pay this? Does she have more exposure?" "Not that I can find. She used savings from her divorce settlement." "But Patrick," her voice broke slightly, "she's going to lose the inn, isn't she? Or she never had it." "She was never going to have it. What she paid for is worthless." "She doesn't know that yet. She thinks she's the new operator." "I know. I'm going to need you to trust me on how I handle this." I did not go to the inn on Wednesday. I let Patricia spend the day believing she'd won. Stuart filed the necessary paperwork Wednesday afternoon to formally document the invalidity of the transfer agreement. We reported the fraudulent notarization to the state. He made a call to an attorney contact in Essex County, who confirmed that Lorraine Peck was already known to law enforcement in connection with 2 ongoing investigations. Thursday morning, I drove to the inn. Patricia was at the front desk, going through the reservation system with her son-in-law, who was trying to figure out the booking software. The property manager I'd hired, a capable woman who'd run the place day to day for 3 years, was standing to one side with her arms crossed and an expression that suggested she'd been having a very long couple of days. Patricia looked up when I walked in. "You need to leave," she said. "This property is under new management." "No," I said, "it isn't. And I think on some level you know that, because if you were certain, you wouldn't look the way you look right now. I have a valid operating agreement. You have a document that Lorraine Peck fabricated. She forged the authorization on the registered agent's signature. Stuart Okafor filed the invalidation paperwork yesterday afternoon. There is no transfer. There never was." I set a copy of Stuart's filing on the desk. "Patricia, Lorraine Peck has 2 active fraud investigations against her in this state. The business address on your invoices is a mailbox store in Peabody. You paid $45,000 for a piece of fiction." Her son-in-law picked up the filing and read the first page. The color went out of his face. Patricia sat down on the stool behind the desk very slowly, like her legs had decided to stop cooperating. "The money," she said. "It's likely gone. Stewart has contacts. We're already making calls, and there's a chance law enforcement can intercept some of it, but recovery rates in these cases are low. I'm sorry." She looked up at me. "How are you sorry? You lied to me for over a year. I protected my privacy. I didn't steal from you. Lorraine Peck stole from you." I kept my voice quiet. "I need you to call your attorney and file a fraud complaint today. The faster you do it, the better your chances of recovering any part of what you lost." "Why do you care what happens to my money?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because your daughter had nothing to do with any of this. Because she called me and told me what happened. Because she deserves better than to watch you lose everything you have, chasing something that was never available in the first place." Patricia's son-in-law set the filing down. "We should have done due diligence," he said. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself, or maybe to Patricia. I should have pushed harder on that. "I knew something felt off with Lorraine from the beginning. You had a business degree and you wanted this to work," I said. "I understand that, but wanting something to be real doesn't make the paperwork legitimate." I gave them an hour to make calls and process what they were looking at. Patricia reached her attorney by phone. Her son-in-law drove her daughter down from Portland. She arrived by early afternoon looking exhausted and relieved to see that I was there. 2 detectives from the Essex County Economics Crimes Unit arrived at 3 o'clock. I sat with them for 40 minutes, going through the documentation and explaining what I knew about Lorraine Peck. The detectives were thorough. They pulled up Lorraine's business registration while we sat there. The company had been incorporated in New Hampshire 11 months earlier, dissolved 6 weeks ago. Her website had been taken down sometime in the past 48 hours. One of the detectives looked at me across the table. "Mr. Sauer, did your wife know the property transfer wasn't legitimate when she delivered the termination notice to you?" "I don't know what she knew," I said. "I know what she believed." "What did she believe?" "She believed she'd found a way to take over a business from a man she thought had no resources and no recourse." He nodded slowly. "And you?" "I had resources and recourse. Lorraine Peck was apprehended 5 days later at Logan Airport. She had $31,000 in a carry-on bag, 3 phones, and documentation for what appeared to be 2 other ongoing acquisition schemes involving properties in coastal New Hampshire. The detectives told me she'd been operating variations of the scam for at least 7 years. Patricia was her 9th confirmed victim in New England. Patricia recovered $31,000 of her $45,000 through the seizure. Not everything, but more than most of Lorraine's victims ever saw. Her attorney worked with the state prosecutor's office, and she avoided any criminal exposure. There wasn't sufficient evidence that she'd known the transfer documents were forged, and the investigation concluded she'd acted as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. Our marriage, of course, was over. Stuart handled the annulment. It was clean legally. Emotionally, it was what it was, the end of something I genuinely hoped would be a beginning. I won't pretend I came out of it without any damage. You can know intellectually that someone was performing a version of themselves for your benefit and still grieve the version you thought you knew. I'd spent 14 months believing Patricia was a woman who'd chosen simplicity and honesty because she'd been burned by the opposite. That was either a very good performance or a version of herself she genuinely wanted to be and couldn't sustain. I've never been sure which. Her daughter stayed in touch. She'd helped me, and I hadn't forgotten it. She sent me a message 2 weeks after everything ended. 3 sentences. I'm sorry for what my mother did. You were always decent to our family. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hired her to do the inn's social media, which she'd been doing as a side project anyway, and doing well. I paid her market rate. She was good at it. The inn itself came through the whole thing fine. My property manager, who had weathered 2 days of Patricia's attempt to take over with impressive composure, received a significant raise and an expanded management role. The event space Patricia had complained was underutilized got a renovation, and we began hosting small weddings and corporate retreats. She'd been right about the opportunity, actually. Just wrong about who it belonged to. 4 months after the annulment, a woman named Harriet started coming in for tea on Sunday afternoons. She was 61, a retired high school English teacher from Rockport, recently widowed. She'd been coming to the inn for years, she told me. She and her late husband had celebrated their 30th anniversary on the garden terrace. She started coming back after he died because the garden made her feel close to him. I told her on her third Sunday that I owned the place. Not as a revelation, not as a confession, just as a fact about myself. She said, "Oh, I know." Mary mentioned it and nodded toward my property manager, who was pretending to rearrange menus at the other end of the room. She told you. Months ago. She's very protective of you. Harriet smiled. She also told me you've been through a difficult year and that you're a good man, and that I shouldn't let you get away with being vague about things. That sounds like Mary. She's not wrong, though, is she? I thought about it. Probably not. We took it slowly. I was honest from the beginning about the inn, about Evelyn, about what had happened with Patricia, about all of it. Harriet listened the way good teachers listen, with complete attention and without rushing to conclusions. She'd had her own loss, her own year of learning to live inside a different shape of life. Neither of us was pretending to be younger or simpler or less scarred than we were. There's something to be said for that, for meeting someone at exactly the level of complexity you actually exist at, without the performance of starting over or the pressure of pretending the past didn't happen. One evening in September, I was locking up after a private event had cleared out, and Harriet was walking through the garden before heading home. The dahlias were at their peak. Evelyn had planted the original bulbs, and I'd kept them going every year since. Harriet stopped beside them and stood there for a moment, not saying anything. She had good taste, Harriet finally said. She had good taste in everything, I said. Flowers, people, property. She knew this place was worth something before I did. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. So is her garden. Harriet looked at me. And you've kept it going for 6 years. By yourself. I had help. Yes, but you kept it going. She turned back toward the dahlias. That's not nothing, Patrick. That's actually quite a lot. I've thought about that since. About what it means to build something slowly and carefully, and then spend years making sure it doesn't fall apart after the person who helped you build it is gone. I didn't do it because I expected a reward. I did it because the work was real, and the place was real, and that mattered to me more than the alternatives. Patricia had tried to take it because she thought it would be easy, because she thought the man in the Carhartt jacket had no way to fight back. She'd been wrong about the jacket, and wrong about the man. Lorraine Peck was wrong about a lot of things, but mostly she was wrong about which properties have real owners behind them and which ones don't. And I was wrong about Patricia, or partly wrong. I was right about keeping my finances private. I was wrong about thinking that caution alone was enough to protect against being used. The lesson I came away with, the one that cost me 14 months and some significant grief to learn, is that privacy is not the same as protection. The only thing that actually protects you from deception is time and attention, not background checks alone, not caution alone, but the patient work of watching what someone does when they think the stakes are low. Harriet does the thing I'm looking for. She does small things honestly, all the time, without audience. She gives me accurate information when it would be easier to be kind. She disagrees with me about matters of substance and doesn't apologize for it. She shows up when she says she will. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make for a great story on its own. But after everything, it turns out that's exactly what I was looking for. Just someone who does ordinary things honestly. day after day, without needing an audience or an angle. I'll take that. I'll take that over everything Patricia was selling. I still think about the morning I found that termination notice on my workbench. The envelope with my name in Patricia's handwriting sitting on top of my pruning shears. There was something almost careful about how she'd placed it there, like she'd thought about the moment, like she'd rehearsed it. What I've come to understand, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit, is that people who intend to take something from you always have a story that makes the taking feel reasonable. Patricia had hers. She'd been left behind. She'd been underestimated. She deserved security. Her family deserved a foundation. Every word of that narrative was designed to make what she was doing feel less like theft and more like correction. That's how it works. The story comes first. The action follows inside it. I don't say this to excuse what she did. She made choices. So did Lorraine Peck, who ran the same scheme on 8 other people before she got to Patricia, and who had been doing it long enough to know exactly how to make forged paperwork look real. Those were deliberate decisions made by people who decided that other people's work and other people's grief were acceptable raw material. That's a moral failure, plain and simple, and no amount of personal history makes it otherwise. But here's what I keep coming back to. I could have caught it earlier if I'd been paying a different kind of attention. Not the cautious attention of a man hiding his assets. I was good at that. The other kind. The kind where you notice not what someone says about themselves, but what they do when they think the outcome is already decided. Patricia showed me who she was in the kitchen that Tuesday morning. The measured voice. The prepared documents. The way her son-in-law wouldn't look at me. I'd seen smaller versions of that calculation before and told myself it was something else. That's on me. What Evelyn taught me, and what I'd somehow let myself forget during those 14 months, is that integrity isn't something you look for in someone's resume. You find it in the small, unobserved moments. Does a person tell you the truth when a comfortable lie would cost them nothing? Do they show up without an audience? Patricia's daughter did exactly that when she called me. She had no guarantee I'd protect her mother from consequences. She called anyway, because it was the right thing to do. That's the thing I actually trust now. Not declarations, not charm, but the quiet evidence of someone doing the decent thing when nobody's watching. And then there's Harriet, who already knew I owned the inn before I told her, and didn't mention it for 3 Sundays, because it didn't particularly change anything for her. That's a person who's already figured out what matters. I didn't have to test her. She'd already shown me. I spent a long time thinking that protecting my privacy was the same as protecting myself. It helped, as far as it went, but the real protection, the kind that actually held, was 25 years of honest work recorded in public documents. A 2-signature requirement my attorney had insisted on, and the fact that I hadn't cut corners when nobody was making me do the right thing. The inn was still mine because Evelyn and I had built it the right way, and I'd maintained it the right way, and there was no version of events where a forged document could erase that. You can't manufacture that kind of foundation. You build it slowly, over years, out of choices that don't feel dramatic at the time. And when someone comes along with a scheme designed to take it from you, the scheme breaks against it. Not because you were clever, because you were steady. That's the only version of security I've ever actually found. The kind you build by deciding every ordinary day to be the kind of person whose work stands up when someone looks closely at it. Harriet has coffee with me on Sunday mornings now. We don't talk about Patricia. We talk about the dahlias, about the guests, about what her late husband used to say about October light on the water. It's quiet, and it's real, and it asks nothing of either of us except honesty. After everything, that's the only thing I was ever actually looking for.